Alrighty, folks. So this is, I'm going to have to handle this one a little bit different because this is, to me, an example of good data, but how biased presentation and poor assumptions can actually ruin some really good data. Okay, so the FBI, they did an assailant study, and they wanted to figure out the mindsets and the behaviors of people who kill law enforcement officers, okay? And so out of 64 officers that were killed, right? So there were 64 officers killed in 53 instances. This report talked about 50 instances only, right? So because like two of the people or something like that were juveniles and stuff like that. And so they only focused on 50 of these incidents, right? But 64 officers were killed, but they only focused in 53 instances, but they focused on 50 instances, right? And so and then they talked to command staff and officers from 13 of the departments where these police officers died, and they were interviewed. Okay, and so research-wise, this is I'm kind of not already in the right ballpark with this one because 50 is a pretty small number when we're dealing about making generalizations, which you'll see really quickly that this article wants to do, but 50, and then interviewing the people that were actually part of the department, that's another one of those things. There might be some inherent bias in that space. So anyway, and so what they did was they figured out the rationale to kill. And so they split it up into two main categories. And that one was the express desire to kill law enforcement, right? And so that's their number one. So if you looked at the report, that's their number one rationale, is that these people, these assailants, that they had the expressed intent of killing police officers. However, there's a little percentage that puts off right there, is that only 28% of the sample actually did this. They had that rationale. Okay, so only 28% of the sample. That means out of the other, 72% of the sample, that means that they fell under the second category, which the reason why the person killed the police officer is that they felt that they were going to lose their freedom by going back to prison. Okay, and so then which one of these seems to be more important rationale? I would go with the one that has the higher percentage, the 72%. However, in this report, they focus way more on the purposeful killing of police officers rationale than they do about people who are just trying to get away. And so here's how this goes. And so with rationale number one, they talked about the reason why this has become much more of a problem is because of posted social media views and on social media and stuff like that inform that the assailants, that they informed people, right, when they had that first rationale of wanting to kill police officers, that they informed the people in their lives on social media. They let their family, friends, and they interviewed all of these folks, and they found out that these people had the express desire to kill police officers, right? And so that's under that first rationale. However, look, in regards to like Dallas, and then they point out Dallas, Texas, and Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and they talk about those two because they're related to Black Lives Matter. And I realized pretty quickly that this article wanted to really smash in on the Black Lives Matter movement and how it's created like this environment, this dangerous environment for police officers, which that might be the case, but I'm waiting for the data for them to present the data on this one, right? And so when you focus though on Dallas, Texas, and Baton Rouge, given their own numbers, that only accounts for 2 of the 14 possible assailants that would fall under the first rationale, right? 28% of 50 instances. I'm assuming that there's one person per instance. You get what I'm saying? So hopefully, I'm making a little bit of sense here, is that if you talk about these 2 incidents, well, that's only 2 people out of the 14. What about the other 12 people? What were their rationales? Were they Black Lives Matter people? Honestly, according to this, just by the bias that I'm seeing in this report, they sure as hell were not Black Lives Matter folks, or else they would have thrown them in also. And so I'm still wondering about, it's like, well, what's this other 12 people who expressly wanted to kill police officers? Who are they? Why would they want to do that, right? And so then when it comes to, so then the second one, the second rationale, it doesn't need any explanation, right? It's like people wanted to get away from the cops. That's how that worked, right? But so then when they talked about the contributing factors and they wanted to talk about this, again, if I was going to focus on something, I would talk about the one that seems to be most important, which is people that kill police officers, they want to get away from the cops because they're going to lose their freedom. That's what I was focused on. But again, in this research, they focus in on the people who are directly trying to kill police officers. And so, so they give this contributing factors. They talk about a chill wind, that for the first time in national politics, leaders are standing against them, against police officers, right? There's definitely a political tension that's happening between politicians and police and the police departments in regards that the politicians are far more likely, or maybe more likely now, to stand against the police departments versus standing with them, which has been historically has been the case, right? And so that very well may be the question. But did they produce any data? I didn't see any data that they produced on that one. A turnstile justice system. And so this one was interesting, and that they're talking about how that because there's the idea that these assailants may perceive that there's lesser punishments for what it is that they're for a crime. All right, because if someone's convicted of a crime, the turnstile idea would be that you're convicted of a crime, you go to prison, and then you get let out real quick, right? And so the idea is that there's a lesser penalty for all of these crimes with the turnstile justice system argument. However, if you really think about that one, this idea that the criminals are thinking that there's lesser penalties actually contradict their number 2 rationale as to why people kill police officers. If people are afraid to kill, if people are afraid of going to prison, and so therefore are willing to kill a police officer because they're afraid to go to prison, then wouldn't that mean that they're thinking that there's heavy penalties for what it is they're about to do, right? And so then the idea that these penalties are not very serious leads to people killing police officers, that completely contradicts, like I said, the second rationale, right? And so then, and then at the end of all of this, look, maybe they could have did better or whatever, but I don't see any data that's backing up any of this stuff, right? And I mean, not only that, but out of 50 incidents, that's a really small data set, right? Like I said, to make these really broad generalizations, that's a really small data set compared to the thousands of people, if you would, over the years that have been killed by police officers, which is where the Black Lives Matter stuff. But honestly, look, I'm going to tell you right now that with Black Lives Matter, I get that we want to talk about, black people being killed by police officers, but I think we're really missing out on the biggest part of that argument, and that is that black people are treated more poorly by police officers, period, in regards to being more likely to use excessive force against them and things like that. And there's plenty of data that backs that up. And so anyway, so this was, like I said, a little bit different than what I've done before in regards to like just taking apart piece by piece the data as it's presented in the assumptions, because again, I would just want to say this is good data, but there were some really bad decisions and assumptions and biases that showed all the way through it. And so anyway, if you have any comments, please feel free, or questions, please feel free to leave those below. And check, and if you like what you're hearing, check, or subscribe, share, check me out on brucehoskins.com if you want to know more about who I am and what I do. Peace, y'all.